to the east, and to the southwest. All those, to the southeast, all those countries are enemies of Israel. But all those enemies of Israel, that land belongs to Israel. By divine right, by divine appointment. And even today, these people are trying to kick Israel into the sea. But that land that they're, especially the Canaan, which is the headquarters, and Canaan is going to be the headquarters in the millennium, all that belongs to Israel. And this is the land I have made over to you, verse 8. Go, take possession of the land that Yahweh swore to give you, your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants after them. Go take it. They should have gone from Sinai to Kadesh, and in Kadesh they should have just gone in. But that's not what happened, as we're going to see. Now, verse 9 through verse 18 is a little sub-paragraph that Moses reminds them of how hard it was dealing with them from Egypt. And we're talking about from Egypt to Sinai. From Egypt to Sinai. And remember, Jethro, his father-in-law, comes and says, Moses, you're day and night sitting on the chair judging Israel. And this is what's called a Beit Din. Moses would have a private Beit Din, and every day from morning to night, he would sit on his chair, and they would bring people their problems, their situations, and he would deal with them. And Jethro, his father-in-law, saw how tired he was at the end. Now, a father-in-law would do that because he was probably saying, look, you're not helping, throwing out the trash for my daughter. You're not taking care of the kids. You know, you're spending time at church. You're spending time doing this, and this in religion. But you're not taking care of your family. Now, I assume that because this is his father-in-law talking. So he says, I'll tell you what, let me give you some advice. Father-in-law advice. And Moses agrees with it and takes it. And at the beginning of the Exodus, they set up a Beit Din. And Moses, right now, reminds them of that. Let's look at that in verse 9. It was then that I told you, I cannot carry the burden of you by myself. Yahweh, your Elohim, has multiplied you. Till now you are like the stars of heaven in number. Remember the promise to Abraham? And Yahweh, your Elohim, is going to increase you 1,000 times more and bless you as he promised. So how can I carry the heavy burden of you and your bickerings all by myself? Bring me wise men, shrewd, tested, out of each of your tribes. Therefore, and I will make them leaders. So one of the things that Adonai told Moses, and Moses here, again, we're looking at this not in the first person, but the second person, third person in Deuteronomy, not like Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And he's telling them what he did. And this is what he did. And this is the setting up of what's called the Beit Din. Everybody say it would be Beit Din. The word Beit means house, and Din means to judge. This is the setting up, the original setting up of an eldership. Not only is there a leader, Moshe, but now he's called to have elders around him. We're not talking about priests. We're not talking about the Levites. At that time, there was no priests or Levites yet. But from every tribe he was to get men that were wise, men that were shrewd, men that had been tested. A leader has to be tested. One of the problems today with leadership is people become leaders and nobody has tested them. You have to be tested. And it says, appoint them or ordain them to lead. Captains of thousands, hundreds, 50s, 10s. So we see here even what we would call a military order, a military style command, where you have leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s. You know, today we have your generals, your captains, lieutenants, sergeants, all the way down to the bottom. And it says this, verse 16, at the same time I told you your judges. Now these leaders, captains, and are also called judges. You must give your brothers a fair hearing and see justice done between a man and his brother or the stranger who lives with him. You must be impartial in judgment and give an equal hearing to small and great alike. Do not be afraid of any man, for the judgment is excuse me. For the judgment belongs to Elohim. When these leaders, when these judges sit in judgment, as a group, as what became known as the Sanhedrin in the Second Temple period, they were to, in fact, in the Second Temple period, there was a 70-member Sanhedrin, 23-member Sanhedrin in regions, and 3-member Sanhedrins in cities. It says there, do not be afraid because the judgment belongs to Adonai. Should a case be too difficult, bring it to me and I will hear it. And I will give you direction at that time for everything you are to do. In fact, it goes on to say that the judgment belongs to Yahweh. Now, how does this apply in New Testament times? How does this apply to the body of Messiah today? How does this apply to our congregation? Well, it is Yeshua and it is Paul who bring up what the judges must do. It is Paul and Yeshua who tell us what must be done. And we are going to see that from Deuteronomy, we are told, if you have odds against the brother, go tell him. That's what Deuteronomy says. If you have odds against a brother, go tell him. Do not let it lie in your heart where you will become a sinner. If you do not want to settle a matter, say a brother has hurt you, a brother has done something against you, and you don't want to settle it, you don't want to deal with it, then you are the loser. And the reason you are the loser is because all of a sudden, hatred's going to begin. Animosity is going to begin. And all of a sudden, you're going to not only hate him, but you're going to hate everyone like him. And pretty soon, you're going to be a bitter, bitter old man or old woman. Because you become the loser. But Yeshua said, taking that word, taking what the Torah says, Yeshua says, if you have odds against a brother, Matthew 18:18, go and tell the brother his sin. If your brother listens to you, you've won back your brother. It is not the purpose to rebuke a brother. When someone does something wrong, our purpose is not to rebuke him. Our purpose is to win them back. Win them back. When someone is in the wrong, do not rebuke him. When someone is in the wrong, bring him back to the right. Now, there in Matthew 18:18, it says, if he listens to you, you've won back a brother. If he doesn't listen to you, Yeshua said, take 2 or 3 witnesses, for in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the Torah says. And you go to him with the witnesses and you tell him, brother, we have this problem. And if he listens to you and your witnesses, you've won back your brother. Case closed, case dismissed. Never shall it ever be talked about again. But Yeshua said, if he doesn't listen to you now, it says, tell it to the congregation. Tell it to the Kehillah. Now, he's in front of the Kehillah. And if he doesn't listen to the Kehillah, 3rd time is a strikeout. Then it says, then treat him like an unbeliever. Then treat him like a publican. In other words, excommunicate him, and that's the rebuke. See, the problem today is when people do wrong, people rebuke them right away. You don't rebuke someone, you don't kick him out. In fact, another problem today is when someone is brought before Matthew 18, then they leave the congregation. They don't want to settle it. Either they don't want to settle it and they excommunicate themselves, or the people rebuke them and they leave the congregation because they were rebuked. Never rebuke someone. Always go to them to try to win them back. If they don't listen, take witnesses. If they don't listen, bring it before the congregation. If they don't listen to the congregation, then the leaders of the congregation have the authority to excommunicate them, to rebuke them. And Yeshua says, therefore, whatever you, the leadership there, bind on earth, it will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loosen on earth will be loosened in heaven. That has nothing to do with prayer. A lot of people use that verse for prayer. That is not a prayer verse. That is a Beit Din verse. That is a verse. And watch what it says right here. It says, do not be afraid of any man, for the judgment is Elohim. The judgment belongs to Elohim. It is Elohim who judges. So when a Beit Din, when a body of judges at the end give a declaration and you treat this person as an unbeliever, it says treat him, Yeshua says treat him as an unbeliever. Once the Beit Din does that, then what they do is done in heaven. What they do is done in heaven. Matthew 18. That's what Matthew 18 says. Now, we have the situation in 1 Corinthians 5. In 1 Corinthians 5, we have a brother who is living in immorality. In fact, he's living in such immorality, he's living with his stepmom. He's being immoral with his stepmom. And he's there in the front pew there of the congregation. And everybody's okay with that. Well, Paul says, wait a second, I'm not okay with that. What you guys need to do is you guys need to get together. It's talking to the leaders there. You guys need to get together and you need to deal with this situation. Because it's gotten out of hand. In fact, it's got so out of hand that he says, you need to deliver this man to Satan so that his body would be destroyed. See, when someone's excommunicated, they're not under divine protection. When someone is excommunicated, they're not under divine protection. They're in their flesh. They're on their own. And when Satan sees people on their own, he goes after them. And so he says, deliver this person to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Today, when that person, somebody would come up to him and say, oh, please, let's give our brother to the Lord. the Lord doesn't want him. Hey, the Lord Adonai has already said, wait a second. Give him to Satan. I don't want him. Give him to Satan. Let Satan take his life. This is what's called the sin unto death. 1 John talks about that. All sin happens, but not all sin will lead to death. There is a sin, John says there in 1 John, that will lead to death. Now, good thing this brother repented, and he repented, and he was so full of sorrow when the eldership came to him that he repented right away. Now, the only problem was, and you find this in 2 Corinthians, the only problem is that the church, they want to forgive him. He repented. Yeah, he was a sinner, and before that they were okay, but once he repents, oh, that dirty sinner. We don't want to have anything to, well, and then Paul rebukes the church. He rebukes the congregation because now they don't want to forgive. Their sin of unforgiveness is worse than his sin of immorality. All sin is the same. You break one part of the Torah, you've broken the whole thing. But these guys were being self-righteous when this man repented. And so in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we see that. We see the excommunication, don't even have a meal with him. And we're not talking about outsiders. He says, we're not talking about those outside the body. Those outside the body you could eat with. But those inside the body that are excommunicated, you can't even have a meal with them. And then in chapter 6, he goes on to say, why are you guys bringing these cases instead of before the Beit Din? You're taking them to the law. You're taking them to the courts of the unjust. And what happens here is that he says, isn't there one man in the congregation that could be part of the Beit Din? Can you imagine? The church of Corinth did not even have one man. There should be at least three. They didn't even have one man to judge. Here in our congregation, the elders of this congregation, which is David, Gilbert, Arturo, and Brother Antonio Camargo are our elders. Any situation that comes up is brought before the elders. And the elders make a judgment, and the elders do this and do that. As exactly as what it says there in Deuteronomy, in Matthew 18, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Now, verse 19, so we left Horeb, we left Sinai, and came to the vast and terrible wilderness you have seen. We made for the highlands of the Amorites as Yahweh, our Elohim, had ordered, and arrived at Kadesh. And it was there, now you have reached, march in, verse 21. March in, take possession of it. Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, has ordered you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Then you all came to me and said. By the way, this word says, do not be afraid. This word, fret not, or do not fear, fear not, is a Hebrew idiom that Adonai tells us so many times, even in Yeshua, in Paul, fear not, fear not, fear not. Adonai is always telling us not to fear, not to be afraid. He points us to do this, to do that, and do not be afraid. Okay, take possession, march in, take possession. Think of it. They left Egypt. 3 months later, they arrived in Sinai. They spent a year in Sinai. Now, they march 11 days north to Kadesh, and they're ready to go in. They're ready to go in the land. But something else happens. He sends the 12 spies. 10 spies come with a negative report. 2, Caleb and Joshua, come with a positive report. And because of that, they said there's giants in the land. The Raphaim, the Anakim, which are the descendants of the Nephilim from Genesis and the time of Noah. Their descendants were in the land. And they were afraid of these giants. They're afraid of these giants. By the way, these giants, they had 6 fingers and 6 toes. The giants that lived in the land had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And did you know that there's descendants of these people today? There are people with that DNA marker of 6 fingers and 6 toes, which are descendants still to this day of these people. And you got afraid. It says, verse 29, do not take fright. Do not be afraid of him. Yahweh, your Elohim, goes in front of you and is fighting on your side as you saw him. As you saw him. How Yahweh carried you as a man carries his child. Now this verse, every one of us needs to know this verse. Every one of us, this is one of those verses that you need to understand. Yahweh, your Elohim, who is going before you. Always remember, wherever you go, Yahweh has been there. He's going before you. He's going to be your vanguard. He's going to be your rear guard. He's going to be on side to side among us. He goes before us as he did for you in Egypt. You know, the most important thing that Israel is always called to remember, and Jewish people remember this even today. With a mighty hand, with outstretched arm, he delivered us from Egypt. Whenever you're going through anything, with a mighty hand, with outstretched arm, he delivered us from Egypt. The Egyptian Exodus is that point in time that we remember where the mighty hand of Adonai rescued us. That's why Yeshua is our Passover lamb. Because as we were rescued by the blood of that lamb on that first Passover, so we shall be delivered today by the blood of the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world, Yeshua. And it's about Yeshua. Remember, Torah is Yeshuic. Torah is about Yeshua. It goes on to say here, there you saw how Yahweh, your Elohim, carried you as a father carries his son, all the way till you reach this place, Kadesh Barnea. We're in Kadesh Barnea. As you reach this place, look at all the things. Remember, we crossed the sea. Remember, we got water from the rock. Remember, we got manna. For 40 years, we've been taken care of. We didn't have to worry about heat. We had an umbrella. For 40 years, we had an umbrella over us. We didn't have to worry about, about the cold. We had a radiator over us heating us up. Think how much Israel grumbled. Grumbled for nothing. Worried for nothing. Doubted for nothing. Feared for nothing. Because Adonai carried us as a father carries a son. That's the greatest feeling for us to have as a father carries his son. As a father carries his son and takes care of his son protects his son, so Yahweh, our Father, will protect us today. You could bank on that. That's a guarantee. That's a seal from Adonai himself. Carried us as a son. What should have been an 11-day journey from Sinai to the borders of Canaan, only 160, 170 miles, turned into a 40-year wandering. They wandered in the wilderness until they all died, all except Joshua and Caleb. Let's go on here. Verse 34. Yahweh heard this talk of yours, and in his anger he took this oath. Not one of these men, this perverse generation, shall see the rich land that I swore to give them, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh. He shall see it. To him and to his sons I give the land he has set foot on, for he has followed Yahweh in all things. Look at that. Caleb. The word Caleb means the dog. A Caleb is a dog. Now, he wasn't a dog in the negative sense of the word. He was a dog in the positive sense of the words, that you all dog lovers. How many of you are dog lovers here? Yeah? Dog lovers. They're your, faithful companion, right? In fact, don't they say dogs are man's best friend? Man's our dog's best friend, they say. And that's who Caleb was. Caleb was a best friend of Adonai. And he has followed me in all, just like a dog follows you, that's the way Caleb followed Adonai. How many want to be Calebs? Every one of us should seek to be a Caleb. And then it goes on to say, now verse 39 is of vital importance. Verse 39 is of vital importance. Because remember, all the grumblings. Every time they grumbled, they always said, have you brought us here to die and our children? You've brought us here to die. You've brought us here to die. You've brought us here to die. But your little ones, who you said would be seized as booty, these children of yours, who do not know good from evil, these shall go in there, and I will give it to them, and they shall possess it. As for you, go back into the wilderness in the direction of the sea of Suf. So when they got there and they grumbled in that end of the first year, and they went to Kadesh ready to take, and they sent spies to reconnoiter the land. And they came back with a bad report. Adonai says, all you are going to die. Can you imagine? From that day on, there was a 40-year death sentence to every man that was alive. By the way, nothing is said about the women. Nothing is said about the women. Nothing is said about the Levites or the priest. It is only the men of military age. Because the men are responsible, then the men get the judgment. And so all the men, all the males that left Egypt, every one of them will die. Not one, with the exception of Caleb and Joshua, will live. So he says, now, start walking. From this point on, it's going to be 38 years. Of course, verse 41 to 46, they do an abortive attempt. They said, oh, we'll go and take the land right now. But the Amorites came against them. The Amorites came and took them, defeated them. And Yahweh got mad at them because when I told you to go, you didn't go. Now I'm telling you, don't go. And you go, whoop, you're on your own again. See, when we get out from the umbrella of Adonai, Satan has us. The only way for protection is to always stay under the umbrella of Adonai. Once we're in his umbrella, we're safe. We get out of his umbrella, then things happen. In verse 46. 45. And when you returned, you shed tears in the presence of Yahweh, but he did not listen to your cries and paid no attention to you. Woo! Can you imagine that? Sometimes, I want to remind you this. If you pray and pray for something and Adonai does not pay attention, something's wrong. And it's because we're not listening to him. We're not obeying him. We're not walking in his steps. Sometimes, in fact, in the prophets, sometimes Adonai says, I'm going to put my hands to my ears and not listen to you. I will not hear you. I will not listen to your cries or pay heed to you. For many a day you had to stay at Kadesh and your full tally of days, which was 38 years, around Kadesh and the surrounding area. Chapter 2. We turned around, therefore, and made for the wilderness in the direction of the Sea of Suf. As Yahweh had ordered me, for many days we wandered about the highlands of Seir. That's 38 years. Yahweh said, you have wandered long enough in these highlands. Go north and give the people this order. You're about to pass through the territory of your kinsmen, the sons of Esau, live in Seir. They are frightened of you. Verse 7, Yahweh your Elohim has blessed you in all you do. He has watched over your journeys through the vast wilderness. Yahweh your Elohim has been with you these 40 years, and you have never been in want. So we passed through the kinsmen, the sons of Esau. And so it's interesting that Adonai says, go through Edom, pass through them, pay them for the water, the food you eat, but don't do anything against them. Don't do anything against Ammon. Don't do anything against Moab. Just skirt their land. Go around, skirt their land, because they're your cousins, they're your primos. But he said to the Amorites, to Og, now Og and Sihon over here are the giants, part of the giant people. And he tells them to go. There in verse 10 through 13 is talking about, again, the Rephaim, the Nephilim. Verse 14, and so we crossed the Wadi Zered from Kadesh Barnea to the Wadi Zered. Our wanderings had taken 38 years. So the whole generation of men fit for war. Okay, the whole generation of men fit for war were lost to the camp, as Yahweh had sworn to them. The hand of Yahweh fell upon them in the camp, and they had perished entirely. When all the men fit for war had been carried off by death from among the people, down to the last man. Down to the last man. So Adonai, down to the last man of those men fit for war, from 20 and older, remember. Then Adonai took their lives, and now Adonai says, now we could go in. Now we could go back. So verse 24, break camp and set out across the Wadi Arnon. And see, I am putting Sihon, the Amorite king of Heshbon, over to you. And they start crossing, and they defeat them. Chapter 3 is the end of the stay. They start coming in into, again, the plains of Moab. And chapter 3, verse 18, then I gave you this command. Yahweh your Elohim has given you this land for your own. All your fighting men must take up arms and march at the head of your brothers, the sons of Israel. Only your wives, your children, and your flocks may stay behind. And so they take off. Verse 22, the end of this. Do not be afraid. Fear not. Again, fear not. Yahweh your Elohim is fighting for you. This parsha ends with fear not. Yahweh is fighting for you. One of the things that we know about this parsha, by the way, this is my birth parsha in the Hebraic calendar. Every one of us has two birth dates. The birth date in the Gregorian calendar, which my birth date in the Gregorian calendar was July 23rd in the Gregorian calendar. But if you figure your birth date on the biblical calendar, the Hebraic calendar, and by the way, there's calculators in your Google machines that you put your Gregorian date and it gives you the actual date that you were born in the biblical calendar. And what makes them different is the Gregorian calendar follows the sun, whereas the Hebraic calendar is a lunisolar calendar. And so it goes by the months. So the year that I was born, was that 1980? I think it was 1970. The year that I was born, July 23rd, occurred on the Hebrew calendar, the 9th of Av. So the 9th of Av is the actual, if I go on the 9th of Av, which is this Wednesday night is the 9th of Av. The 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, Tisha B'Av in Hebrew. If I go on Wednesday night and look at the moon, look at the stars, the night I was born, it was that system right there. You can't do this on the Gregorian calendar. If I went on July 23rd, which is a couple of days ago, if I were to go up, it'd be a different setup. Because the Hebrew calendar, the same Hebrew date every year is the same moon position. You could actually find out if I was born at this time, the moon would have been right there the moment I was being born. You can't do that in the Gregorian, but in the Hebrew calendar you can. So the 9th of Av is the day. So this is the parsha for Devarim, is the parsha for my Hebrew birth date. And this Wednesday is the 9th of Av. Now, the 9th of Av is a very important date in Jewish history, in Hebrew history, because it was on the 9th of the month of Av that the first temple of Solomon was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Interesting enough, it was the 9th of Av that the second temple of Herod was destroyed by Titus, the Roman prince. The two major temples and other interesting negative things have occurred on the 9th of Av. For us Sephardic Jews, for us that have Sephardic or Jewish lineage through Spain, the 9th of Av is a very important date for us. Because the 9th of Av is when all Jewish people living in Spain were ordered to leave Spain. By that date, every Jewish person had to leave Spain or be converted. You either had to become a Catholic or leave Spain. And when you left Spain, you had to leave Spain with nothing but the clothes on your back. You had to sell any property you had. You had to have, they had what we would call today flea markets, and everything had to go. And whatever wasn't sold was just left there. In fact, people that were rich, there was a person who was a diamond collector. When he got to the border, they actually killed him and cut his stomach because they thought he had swallowed the diamonds so he could take diamonds out. That's how ruthless the Inquisition was. The Spanish Inquisition was very ruthless. And anyone that converted to being a Catholic, they'd watch you closely. And that's where the name Inquisition comes in. The word Inquisition is to inquire. So what they would do is they would go to your neighbors and say, tell us about Don Jose over there. Tell us about him. Does he eat pork? On Saturdays, is there smoke coming out of his chimney? They would have what they called matanzas. Anybody ever hear of matanza? A matanza is where you get a pig and you have a free meal for the community. Matanzas were free meals. So they would have matanzas, a free meal, free all the pig you could eat. Well, everybody would come. Guess who wouldn't come? The Jewish believers. And because they were Catholic, well, why don't you come? Oh, I can't, I'm too full or whatever. But if they didn't come because, again, they were still keeping kosher, or they were not lighting their fires on Shabbat, they were now burned at the stake, not for being Jewish, but for being heretics. Why? Because what are you as a Catholic doing stuff that the heretics, the Jews, are doing? So they were burned as heretic Catholics, not as Jews. According to the Inquisition, they did not kill one single Jew. Because to them, once you converted and became a Catholic, you became a Gentile. And you were no longer Jewish. Sad thing is, most Jews and Christians still believe that superstition, that lie. And so the 9th of Av, our ancestors from Spain had to leave. Many of them stayed. In fact, many Jewish rabbis, some of my ancestor Jewish rabbis became Catholic just because they wanted to live in their native Spain. A couple of them actually became bishops later on. Many of the Jewish people became priests so that they could infiltrate and be able to study Torah without, because remember, the Bible was forbidden to the people. In fact, that's the same day that Christopher Columbus left Spain for the Americas on the 9th of Av. That year, it would have been, I believe, August 11th. So this Wednesday night and now Thursday day is the 9th of Av. Typically, to most people, it is a day of fasting. It's a day of fasting because of the destruction of the temple. And that's a traditional thing that is done on the 9th of Av. But I want you on Wednesday night, we're going to have, besides our study, by the way, on Wednesday nights, we're studying the book of John. We're going through the whole book of John. And so please join us on Wednesday nights for exposition on the book of John. But this Wednesday, we're going to have a little 10-minute remembrance of the 9th of Av. It's called Tisha B'Av. Wednesday the 29th, ends nightfall on Thursday, July 30th. Please join us. Let's go ahead and stand. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to be here. And we pray, Father, that the lessons that we're going to learn in the book of Deuteronomy, Father, the lessons we're going to learn and the next generation, Father, the book of Deuteronomy is a summary of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Allow us to look at the book of Deuteronomy as this summary of what a new believer, the new generation, needs to learn, needs to know. Father, if anybody wants to learn Torah in a nutshell, the book of Deuteronomy is Torah in a nutshell. In one book, everything from Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers is summarized. And that's why they called it a second law, because it was like a second reading, a repetition of the heart of Torah, which is Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. So teach us more and more. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. Yeverechecha Yahweh va'ishmerecha. Ayir Yahweh panav elecha v'chunecha. Asa Yahweh panav elecha v'yasem lecha. Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. Amen. Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries. Thank you for joining us on our channel. If you have enjoyed this teaching and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we have new videos. If you would like to support Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries, please visit us at olivetreefellowship.com or TorahUnleashed.org. We thank you for your past support and hope to continue with you. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. Shalom, shalom y bienvenidos a Olive Tree y a la Torah Desatada. Les doy gracias a ustedes y a Adonai por su apoyo que nos han dado aquí. Y si quieren continuar a hacer una donación, pueden ir aquí en TorahUnleashed.org o en olivetreefellowship.com y ahí pueden dar una donación. Su apoyo, su ayuda es importante en estos días. Shalom, shalom.